The way I see that is America is actually, when you think of a drug addict, America is actually Israel's drug dealer, plus it's trying to sponsor its rehab. It doesn't work. So US complicity in Israeli apartheid is one of the biggest stumbling blocks to peace. I want to touch on quickly about the issue of apartheid and why it is that we say there's apartheid. Now, I just want to show you a couple of photos that I have because, sometimes people don't believe you when you say Israel is an apartheid state. So maybe they might believe these people. It is time to delegitimize this entity. We did that to the apartheid government in South Africa, and the same must happen to Israel. No more impunity. Israel's leaders must be held to account. Who said that? Erasmia. So I'm pretty certain that that comrade knew what he was talking about. I have seen the humiliation of Palestinians at checkpoints and roadblocks, suffering like we did when young white police officers prevented us from moving about. My heart aches. Desmond Tutu. The current situation for Palestinians in the occupied territories is worse than conditions were for blacks under the apartheid regime. Khalima Motlanthe. And this one is actually my favorite because I think that this guy, he knew what apartheid was and he would be able to recognize it if he saw it. Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state. Hendrik Verwoerd. Now, so many people are telling us that Israel is an apartheid state, yet they still deny it. One of the things that we need to do is understand that apartheid isn't just what happened in South Africa, blacks and whites being segregated. It's also about what we've just seen, the theft of land, controlling people, that kind of thing. Because in South Africa, and I'm sure a lot of the older people in this audience, and some of these comrades would understand this, it wouldn't have meant much to us if blacks and whites could swim at the same beach. You can swim at the same, go to the same toilets, use the same restrooms, sit on the same park benches. But you're not allowed to own land. You can't live where you want to. You can't buy businesses. It was grand apartheid in South Africa that oppressed. Petty apartheid just rubs salt in the wounds. Israel tries to tell us, no, look, Jews and Arabs, they live together and they're on the same bus and all of that. But can an Arab buy land in Israel? No. That's how you oppress people. Can they get the job that they want to? No, because there's actually job reservation. So, it means little to Palestinians inside Israel that they can sit on the same bus, but they can't buy land, they can't build homes. Those are the important things for people. I also want to just show you a picture. When we say apartheid, right, for me this really sums it up. So two 12-year-old children, one a Jewish settler and one a West Bank Palestinian, get into a fight, and they're both arrested by the Israeli police. What happens next? This is the Israeli child, right? So what happens to the Israeli child. How long can they be detained before seeing a judge? An Israeli child can only be detained for 12 hours. But the Palestinian child can be detained for 4 days. Remember, they both committed the same crime. How long can they be detained before seeing a lawyer? The Israeli kid, only 2 days. A Palestinian child can be detained for up to 90 days before being allowed to see a lawyer. How long can they be held without charge? An Israeli child can be held for 40 days, but a Palestinian child can be held for 60 days. How long can they be held before coming to trial? An Israeli child can only be held for 6 months, but a Palestinian child can be held for up to 1.5 years. The Israeli child will have an 80% chance of bail. The Palestinian, only 13%. And they still want to tell us that everybody is treated equally. The Israeli child cannot go to prison because in Israeli law, no sentencing for children under 14. The 12-year-old Palestinian child can, however, be in prison because under Israeli military law, they do allow it. So, that's basically the dual legal systems that happen in the West Bank. So you have an Israeli settlement and the Palestinians, they're not treated the same. Some people are clearly more, their lives are more valuable than others. Some kids are more important than others. I want to get on to Gaza very quickly. And I think we need to understand what Gaza is.
Gaza, with more than 1.7 million people living there, this tiny strip of land is one of the most densely populated areas in the world and one of the worst places to live. It's been called the world's largest open-air prison. Here's why. Gaza has been home to a majority refugee population since 1948, when Israel declared its statehood and forced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians out of their homes. Many fled to the Gaza Strip. For decades, Israel has controlled Gaza by air, land, and sea, regulating what goes in and what goes out. When the Palestinian Party Hamas won parliamentary elections in 2006, Israel intensified its siege and collective punishment of the Palestinian people living there. That's because Israel considers Hamas a terrorist organization, even though to some Palestinians, it's a legitimate resistance movement. Israel's blockade of Gaza has been condemned by the UN as a violation of international law. It's cut off Palestinians from the rest of the world and made life in Gaza pretty unbearable. 80% of the population is dependent on aid. It's no surprise then that more than 50% of households lack no food for their families. Water is also a huge problem, with more than 90% of Gaza's water unsafe for drinking. Water treatment plants need spare parts and fuel, both rare resources to operate. Medicine and doctors are also in short supply, and only those with immediately life-threatening conditions are allowed to travel out of Gaza for healthcare, if they're lucky. It doesn't help that Egypt also keeps a very tight border with Gaza, heavily limiting who comes in and out. Infrastructure has also suffered. Basic items like cement, gravel, and steel are largely banned from entering Gaza. That's because Israel says they could be used to make weapons. So basically, Gaza can't build enough to keep up with its growing population. There are also frequent power outages due to fuel shortages for up to 12 hours a day. And Gaza's economy, it's paralyzed. Israel limits Gaza's exports to only 1 truckload of goods per day. Its unemployment rate is one of the highest in the world at nearly 40%. Israel has also launched several large attacks on Gaza. The thing is, in such a densely populated area, no one is safe. Israel says these operations are in response to the indiscriminate firing of rockets by armed Palestinian groups in Gaza. But many have pointed out that the effects of these attacks are disproportionate. November 2008 called Operation Cast Lead. More than 1,400 Palestinians were killed and thousands more were wounded. Much of Gaza's infrastructure was destroyed. Then in November 2012, an 8-day operation killed 133 people. One airstrike alone took out 12 people in one family, including 5 children. And the Israeli bombardments continue to this day. That's a glimpse of life in Gaza. And for a generation of young Palestinians who've never been able to leave, it's all they know. So the next time you see Gaza in the headlines, don't forget what you just heard.
Okay, that was life in Gaza. I just wanted to talk quickly because Israel always says it's left Gaza. In Gaza, you're not going to find checkpoints and apartheid laws and soldiers on the ground like what you do in the West Bank. Gaza is under siege. Israel left in 2005, but what it does is it controls every possible way of getting into Gaza. So the borders, the sea, the air, everywhere. You're basically imprisoned in your own house. And that is the reason why people are being slaughtered the way that they do. They have nowhere to go. One of the main things you will hear, and I have to say it in the way in which the Israelis say it, Hamas. They like saying it like that. The thing you'll hear about Hamas is about its charter. It's all about the Hamas charter. The Hamas charter was written during the first Intifada, and it was very hastily written. It was very poorly conceived. And even I would admit that because of the fact that in Arabic there is no word for Zionist, there's only a word for Yahud, which means Jew. So in some ways, I can see why people say that charter is anti-Semitic. The thing is, though, that Hamas has evolved over the years, and its charter doesn't quite keep up with its political evolution. Hamas has always said, now in the last 10 years especially, it recognizes the two-state solution based on 1967 borders, and it is ready and willing to negotiate. But Israel and America will not allow it to. What's interesting is that the charter of the Likud party, now Likud is the party that has been in charge of Israeli governments for the last 30 years. The Likud charter doesn't even mention the creation of a Palestinian state. Yet, I don't see any headlines that say Likud calls for the destruction of the Palestinian state. So there's a lot of double standards here. Likud isn't labeled a terrorist, and it's not kept out of negotiations the way Hamas is. And in many ways, Hamas is sidelined and it's stigmatized in exactly the same way that people said the ANC is a terrorist organization, they want to drive whites into the sea. I'm still waiting to find the whites floating in the sea. Hamas, over the last few years, its demands have been very simple. It has called for the release of all Palestinian political prisoners, the unbanning of all its liberation movements, including Islamic Jihad and Hamas itself. It must allow the refugees to return and stop the violence and murder of the Palestinian people. These demands are almost identical to the ones made by Nelson Mandela as soon as he was released from prison and before the ANC entered into negotiations. Because we tend to forget our own history sometimes, and we think that it was all just lovey-dovey, roses and hugs. It wasn't. Mandela was very strict. He wanted the conditions for negotiations to be met first before he sat down at the table with the apartheid government. And that's exactly what Hamas is doing. The other thing is, almost every founding member of Hamas has been killed by the Israeli government. Now the question that I want to ask is, would the ANC have sat down to negotiate with the apartheid government If the nationalists had assassinated Mandela, Sisulu, Tambo, Katrada, Slovo, and other senior leaders? I don't think so. But Hamas is expected to react differently. Its entire leadership, its founding members have all been killed in assassinations. But they are expected not to react. The question as South Africans that we need to ask is, how would our liberation movements have reacted? I just want to show 2 more videos, and I think that will take us to 20 to 12 and Salah time. I don't think this workshop is going to be continuing because I've been told that it's best that I finish up now. The first is why the current attacks on the Gaza Strip, and then the next one is what the mainstream media is not telling us about Gaza.
And the devastation is only increasing. You might be wondering, what exactly is Israel trying to achieve in Gaza? An analysis of Israeli Army's tweets shows the reasons have been changing. Here's how. First, it was all about the 3 Israeli teens who were kidnapped and killed in June. Netanyahu immediately blamed Hamas without so much as a shred of evidence.
Hamas terrorists carried out Thursday's kidnapping of 3 Israeli teenagers.
That narrative was everywhere. Is there any doubt for you at this point that Hamas is responsible?
No, there's no doubt. The 3 teens who were brutally murdered by the Hamas terrorists, unfortunately, there's no doubt about that.
But guess what? It's now been confirmed by Israeli officials that the kidnappings were carried out by a lone cell not operating under Hamas leadership. They later tried to take back that statement. Regardless, right after the kidnappings, Israel heavily cracked down on the occupied West Bank with raids and arrests, and Hamas responded by firing rockets into Israel from Gaza. All of that led to this current offensive, Operation Protective Edge. Israel's narrative then shifted to rocket attacks. Here's what we heard.
No country on earth would remain passive in the face of hundreds of rockets fired on its cities, and Israel is no exception.
We cannot compromise with death. We cannot compromise with rockets.
The objective of this mission is very simple. We need to restore deterrence. We need to end the rocket fire.
Israel says more than 2,800 rockets have been fired from Gaza since July 8th, resulting in 3 civilian deaths. 90% of the rockets targeted by the Iron Dome have been intercepted, protecting Israeli lives. Still, Israel justifies its military offensive in Gaza, saying it has a right to defend itself. But if this is about defense, why do Gaza's civilians make up more than 75% of the dead, according to the UN? And why have hospitals, homes, schools, and markets been directly targeted by Israel in violation of international law? So after the kidnappings and then the rocket attacks, Israel now says the operation is about the tunnels.
There's a maze of terror tunnels in Gaza
That is geared to penetrate our territory.
Coming into Israel to try to kill our people.
Israel launched a ground invasion into Gaza on July 17th to destroy what it says is a sophisticated network of tunnels used by Hamas and other groups. Palestinians say they primarily use the tunnels to smuggle in food and supplies far from entering the Strip. Israel has known about them for years. But now Israel says it won't end its offensive until all the tunnels are destroyed.
עשרות מנהרות טרור, ואנחנו נחושים להשלים משימה זו, עם או בלי הפסקת אש.
The changing tune only suggests Israel provoked a war in Gaza without clear objectives. Assuming all the rockets are stopped and the tunnels are blown up, the question remains, what is Israel's end game in Gaza? And given that Israel again ended siege of the Strip, is this just about maintaining the status quo? The world is left wondering, especially the people in Gaza. What do you think the next chapter will be? Let us know in the comments below. The average viewer watching mainstream news would think the latest violence between Israelis and Palestinians Palestinians began with the kidnapping of 3 Israeli teens on June 12th. Guess what? That's not the case. Here's what the mainstream media isn't telling you. Before the Israeli teenagers were kidnapped and killed, 5 Palestinian children had been killed by Israel in 2014 alone. Their deaths didn't generate international outrage or a global campaign, but what they did do was add to Palestinians' ever-growing frustration and Israeli occupation.
Today, Israeli warplanes
Okay, it's fine. It's fine. Don't worry, I'm going to finish up now. I hope that I've given you more or less a good understanding of what the basic issues are and what the basic stereotypes are. There was a lot more detail that I could have gone into, but I don't think time is on our side. With regard to Hamas, I just want to say, you've probably heard in the media, Hamas has rejected the ceasefire. You know, it continues to reject ceasefires. What Hamas has done is proposed a 10-year ceasefire in return for conditions being met. And this is some of Hamas's conditions that doesn't ever get out there. Again, it wants the release of re-arrested Palestinian prisoners. So these political prisoners were all released as part of a previous deal. They want the opening of the Gaza-Israel border crossings in order to allow citizens and goods to pass through. They want the international supervision of the Gazan seaport in place of the current Israeli blockade. So they want to end the siege of Gaza. They want political prisoners to be released. And I have to ask the question, aren't those pretty reasonable demands? Especially when we consider our own history. At the end of that video, we were basically asking the question, why is Israel attacking Gaza? And it's actually something that comes up every 2 years. In 2006, it was Lebanon. 2008, 2009, it was Qasleid. 2012, it was Pillar of Defense. 2014, it's Protected Edge. So every 2 years or so, and this is actually the idea of strategy, it's called mowing the lawn. They mow the grass. They cut down any blades of resistance that they find. It's basically to keep that population in check. The other reason for it is something called soft transfer. And very simply put, we will make the lives of these people so miserable that they leave. That is really what it's about. If we can kill some of them physically, that would be great too. But let's just strangulate them with checkpoints in the West Bank, with permits, with things like that. We'll make their lives so miserable that they leave. They can go to Jordan, because that's where Palestinians are supposed to be living. It's called soft transfer, and it ties in with what I showed you earlier, maximum land, minimum people. So that is really what, when you say free Palestine, that's actually what you're freeing Palestine from, what the issues are. Jazakallah for your time, and you guys have been a really, really great audience. If there are questions that you'd like to ask me, you can, because I think we're going to break just now for Salah, you can come up to me personally and ask. Apologies for the sound. We had multimedia clips. I don't know how much of it you heard. If you want access to it, check Facebook and Twitter, the MRN Facebook page, and the Twitter account. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah, Surya. I'd just like to call upon Amira to do a vote of thanks, and then Adnan will say a dua, recite a dua.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just like a flower needs rain to blossom, so does a community need its members to help it achieve its goals. Alhamdulillah, with the grace and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have come a long way since our initial idea of organizing this workshop, and none of it would have been possible without the help of all those who participated in this event. Firstly, we need to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us the patience and ability to make this occasion a success. Next, our special thanks goes to Suraya Dalu for a very informative and inspirational presentation. Media Review Network and South African Youth for Palestinian Youth for hosting the event. Al-Ghazali College for the use of their facilities, Riaz Mohammed for the sound system, as well as all of you, ladies, gentlemen, boys and girls, who have contributed in any way, however big or small. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts our du'as and makes our efforts bear fruit in seeking freedom for the people of Palestine. Thank you.
Please recite Surah Fatiha once and 3 times Surah Ikhlas for the people of Palestine and for the unity of the Muslims all over the world. اللهم لك الحمد كله ولك الشكر كله. اللهم لا نحصي ثناء عليك انت كما اثنيت على نفسك. اللهم انصر اخواننا المجاهدين في فلسطين، وانصر اخواننا المجاهدين في العراق وفي الافغان وفي الصومال. اللهم انصر في كل مكان. اللهم انصر بنصرك وايدهم بتأييدك، وارفع بهم رايتك، وانصر بهم دعوه نبيك، حاحل بهم قدسك الكريم يا رب العالمين. Ya Allah, Ya Hayyu, Ya Qayyum, make them as you have described in your book. الذي قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل فانقلبوا بنعمة من الله وفضل لم يمسسهم سوء. Those unto whom the people said, verily the people have gathered against you, therefore fear them, but it only increased them in faith, and they said, Allah is sufficient for us, and He is the best disposer of affairs. So they returned with grace and bounty from Allah. No harm touched them. O Allah, increase them in iman and piety. O Allah, raise them many ranks. O Allah, forgive their sins. O Allah, expand their breast. O Allah, strengthen their iman. O Allah, unite their words. O Allah, unite their ranks and make their beliefs accurate, and their shooting accurate, and aim their arrows for them. O Allah, supply them with assistance from you. O Allah, send down for them your angels. O Allah, make from their hearts. O Allah, purify their members. O Allah, be their ears with which they hear. O Allah, be their hands with which they strike. O Allah, be their ears with which they hear, and their eyes with which they see. Ilahana, Ilahana, who is for the martyrs in their graves. Ilahana, who is for the righteous mujahideen at their stations. Ilahana, who is for the righteous prisoners in their prisons. La rahima, la rahima, wa la munkidhi lahum illa ant. Ilahana, who is for the orphans in their homes. Ilahana, there is none that is merciful and no Savior for them except you. Ilahana, and there is no Savior for them except you to ask for salvation. You are the Lord of the oppressed. أنت رب المستضعفين أنت رب العالمين. You are the Lord of the worlds. إله الحق. As you gave victory to the Prophet ﷺ in the battle of Badr and Uhud, O Allah, likewise give victory to our mujahideen. O Allah, rescue them, salvage them from the spiteful crusaders and traitorous Zionists and concealed hypocrites. O Allah, cast your revenge upon the wrongdoers, for they can't escape you. Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, send down upon them the storm of Aad and the cry of Thamud and the typhoon of Nuh. Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum Ya Dhul Jalali wal Ikram, weaken their forces, weaken their resolve, sow dissension within their ranks, dissipate their unity, place disaster of evil upon them, make their scheming be their destruction. Make their power work against them, afflict them with what rains down from your sky and what comes out of your earth. O Allah, they made the Muslim children orphans, so make their children orphans, and they kill Muslim men, so kill their men. O Allah, let us share the reward of the Mujahideen. Ya Allah, you accept the work of all those doing the work of Haqq. اللهم إنا نسألك من خير ما سألك منه نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ونعوذ بك من شر مستعاذ منه نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم بفضل سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallah to everyone for your attendance. Please don't forget there's a refreshment table on the side and help yourself, and Surya will still be here if you want to ask